Okay, good morning. Time now a few minutes after 8 o'clock in the morning in Tokyo, Friday, June 18th, 2021. Welcome to another edition of the World Bank Group morning seminar organized by the World Bank Tokyo office. My name is Koichi Omori. I am Senior External Affairs Officer of the World Bank based in Tokyo. We organize lots of online seminars starting at 8 o'clock in the morning in Japan Standard Time, introducing the latest report presented by the World Bank Group economists and specialists. This morning, we are featuring a new report titled What's Cooking? Digital Transformation of the Agri-Food System, which came out in March this year. With us connecting from Washington, we have Garda Elabet, the Senior Economist in Agriculture and Food Global Practice of the World Bank. Garda is the co-author of the Fat Cooking Report. Good morning or good evening to you, Garda. How are you? Can you hear us?
Good morning, Koichi. I'm good, thank you. Thanks for inviting me to present.
Perfect, great. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. We'll listen to Garda presenting the main points of the report in the next 30-40 minutes. Following her presentation, I'll read your questions that we received in advance. If you did not have opportunities to send your question in advance, please do so even during the seminar using online form posted on the announcement page for this seminar. Of course, you can simply post your questions on the chat section of the YouTube screen. After Garda's presentation, I'll read your questions and ask her to respond. With that, I would like to ask Garda to come in and start your presentation, and I'll switch the screen to your presentation. So over to you, Garda.
Thank you, Koichi. Thank you. So thank you and good morning again, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yes, perfectly.
Perfect, thank you. Thanks again for hosting this event, Koichi, and for inviting me to speak about digital agriculture. Let me start by providing a quick overview of today's presentation. So this is a preview of a World Bank publication called What's Cooking? Digital Transformation of the Agri-Food System. This book was the product of a team effort from World Bank staff, consultants, and interns who are based at the Global Engagement Unit of the Agriculture and Food Practice. And it was also it also involved a lot of collaboration with other specialists and economists sitting in other areas of the World Bank. So what I first want to point out is that this publication is not a description of digital technologies in agriculture. It's not going to describe in details the different technology happening in the market and biotechnologies, nanotechnologies, etc. Instead, what we aim to do with this publication is how our food system is changing rapidly because of digital technologies. We also aim to describe the role of the public sector to ensure that these changes have positive impacts on the environment, on equity and efficiency. So at the end of the presentation, I will provide 7 areas that we think are important to consider for policymakers to maximize the benefit of digital technologies and also minimize associated risks. So there are really 4 key messages for the presentation. First is that while COVID-19, this pandemic has caused major losses worldwide, it has also created a huge opportunity in terms of how we think about the food system and the role of digital technologies in transforming the food system. It also gave us insights into what's going to happen in the future. The second key message is related to the data. Everything evolves around data with digital technologies. And there are issues of data ownership, control, security that policymakers need to take into account. The third point is related to the role of the public sector. Like in any other activity, the public sector role has to be focused on safeguarding users' rights, promoting the development of the private sector, and not displacing it. And I will come back to that point later. And finally, we find that policies are, of course, needed to ensure that there is no gender gap or digital divide with this digital technology development. Koichi, if you may go to the next slide, please. So the key question that we are trying to answer with this report is the following. Our global food system sustains the world ever-growing population, creates millions of jobs, and is critical in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. But the global system is currently not fit for purpose. It is stressing the environment, generating up to 30% of greenhouse gas emissions. And while there is an abundance of food, we see that there is issue of undernourishment worldwide, and also some people are obese. A lot of food, more than the water, is lost and wasted, and most of the poor people live in rural areas. So our problem is that we have a food system that has the potential to really transform our livelihoods and the economy and deliver on several objectives, and yet it's not achieving these objectives. So we are actually facing three questions. How can we make the food system a major source of greenhouse gas mitigation adaptation? How can it produce jobs and incomes for people? And how can it be a source of healthy people? So this is really the most important challenge of our generation and for government to think about. How can we help the food system overcome these challenges and meet its sustainable development goals? Next slide, please. So addressing the challenge that I just described requires acknowledging the complexity of the food system. As you see from this graph, the main challenge of the food system is that it's connecting 600 million farms with close to 7.5 billion people who are consumers like me and you, who are located globally. So these farmers are also connected to hundreds of thousands of actors upstream and downstream of value chains. For example, seed producers, machinery producers, insurance providers, food logistic providers, processors, etc. So you can think about the millions of connections that need to take place between different actors so that we get the food on our plates. This involves tons of information, a lot of transactions between each actor of the food chain and farmers and consumers. And there's an interesting statistic that showed that in 2014, it was estimated that each farm in a developed country was producing 200 kilobytes of data. And in 2050, this number is predicted to multiply by 20, basically. So you can see there is a huge amount of data out there generated in the food system. It's very complex, complicated, and requires a lot of computing and ability to process and generate meaningful information. Next slide, please. So the other issue that needs to be addressed to overcome the challenge of the food system is transaction costs. So as I said earlier, it takes dozens of stakeholders and transactions to bring food from farmers to consumer. And these transactions are almost everywhere along the value chain. So they're incurred by farmers, their business partners. Farmers need to incur transaction costs to find who to sell the food to, how to make deals, and ensure that they are enforced, etc. So for example, you can think of farmers who want to produce extra virgin olive oil, and they need to decide what olive variety to use, how to harvest the crop and transport it to processing facility, where and how to sell it, etc. So all these decisions involve transaction costs, which reduces the profit of the farmer, drive them to choose quantity over quality, often at the expense of the environment. So ultimately, this behavior affects consumers' product choices. So, and if we pause a moment and think of the magnitude of this problem, when we have close to 600 million farmers and 7.5 billion consumers, you can see that the issue of transaction costs is huge, and this is probably what's keeping the food system from reaching its objective. So next slide, please. So, sorry. So in this context, digital technologies are very promising. And why? It's because the main hypothesis is that they can reduce these transaction costs, as I just discussed, and they can help the agri-food system overcome these transaction costs to deliver on its promise. So we call this a digital revolution, which is enabled by the fact that this there is a massive amount of information and an ability to use the data, analyze it, and generate very useful insights. So what's different about this revolution? We know in the agriculture sector, there have been many revolutions in the past, starting from the farm. For example, the British Revolution, the Neolithic Revolution, etc. All these revolutions have one thing in common, which is they started on the farm and they improved the productivity of farmers. The difference with the digital revolution is, and it's profoundly different from the other revolution, is that it started at different points along the value chain. So actually it's affecting how things work on the farm, but also upstream with input providers, seed providers, etc., and downstream the farm from retailers, processor, packaging companies, etc. So the takeaway here is that the digital technologies is affecting, digital revolution is affecting the whole food system rather than the farm productivity. And it's profoundly different from any other revolution that was witnessed on farm. Next slide, please. So of course, what we show in the book is that digital technologies can solve some of the old issues that we encounter in the food system. And we go over these issues in detail in the book. So for example, one of the key benefits of digital technologies is increasing market efficiency in the value chain. So for example, we can think of e-commerce platforms where customers can order their food and groceries with a single click. For example, in Africa, there is an emerging e-commerce platform. It's called Jumia, and it's dramatically changing the way consumers and producers interact. These platforms allow farmers to access multiple markets and obtain better prices for their products. Also, the second benefit of digital technologies is improving equity. We show that through the inclusion of smallholder farms, women, marginalized populations, digital agriculture can improve equity, reduce the divide between these populations. And finally, digital technologies will also have some environmental benefit in terms of sustainability, and this happens through increased efficiency and reduction of food waste, better resource management, and rewarding of environmentally friendly practices. So of course, these benefits are classic, and we go over them in detail in the report. But of course, digital technologies, like any other technologies, they come with risks. For example, the biggest risk we identify is the risk of lack of competition. There are concerns that digital markets will increase market power and filter profit to a few digital technology providers. This risk really exists when companies like digital platforms start controlling large amount of information about consumers, markets, farmers. And we saw, for example, in the US, since the 80s, eight firms have more than doubled the share of the US food retail market that they control. So this increased market power is probably used to their increased ability to use just-in-time digital technologies to focus on improved efficiency of the market. So here we see how digital technologies could really create lack of competition and increase market concentration and make markets fail. The second risk that we identified is a digital divide. So this means that there is a risk, like in any innovation, that people still cannot access the technology because either they don't have good internet connection, or they don't know how to use the technology, or they don't know that the technology exists. Also, there is a new social risk that emerges with digital technology. As I said earlier, data is everything. Data is the core input for digital technologies, and with data come many risks. So an important question is who controls the data collected by the digital technology providers, and who controls what they do with it? So for example, platforms such as Amazon, Jumia, or Uber, they collect all sorts of information on farmers and consumers. And the question is, what do they do with that data? How do they protect the privacy of consumers? So for farmers, this is a big concern because they provide both their personal information, but also business data when they use digital technology. Since the farmer's address is both his farm, which is a business, and also its personal address. So using digital platforms like e-extension, input, insurance, credit, kind of expose farmers and makes them vulnerable. So this is one risk. And then the other risk that we identified is what's called the rebound effect. And it's because these technologies allow farmers to exploit resources and the environment in a more efficient way. So this happens when there is a risk. The rebound effect happens when there is a risk of overexploitation of natural resources because of technologies like digital technologies. For example, if we think of drip irrigation, so this is a water saving technology in a water constrained environment, it has the potential to save a lot of water in theory. But at the same time, this is not really true because farmers, when they see that they are saving money by conserving water, perhaps they are tempted to increase the area they allocate for drip irrigation and use more water to produce more. So unless there is a good policy in place to discourage this type of behavior and disincentivize it, then we may witness what's called the rebound effect and a reduction in natural resources. Next slide, please. So the other key questions of the report are the following, and they are presented in 3 enablers. So how does the public sector ensure that the agri-food system benefits from digital technologies and mitigates the risk that I just described? So the report will present 3 key roles, as you see in the pyramid. The first are the non-digital enablers, and they mean that we want to ensure that basic roads and infrastructure is there. It's known without roads, without infrastructure, it's not possible to develop agriculture, let alone digital technologies. So these are really still important building blocks to the pyramid we want to put together. So, and in this context, digital technologies, for example, satellite images, GIS, mobile phones, they can help guide where and how to build this infrastructure. The second point is that we need digital infrastructure as an enabler, and this should be provided by the public sector. This consists of phone, internet networks that allow digital technologies to work. Most of the time, these services are provided by the private sector, but in some cases, they are provided, in some cases in remote areas, for example, it makes sense for the public sector to provide them because the cost is too high for the private sector. And finally, the third enabler, and perhaps one of the most important one, is open data and the skills that are required to use these data. We believe that policies need to support innovative ecosystems for digital agriculture through several means, and identify them in the report. These include open data sets, digital platforms, digital entrepreneurships, digital payment system, and digital skills. So I will spend the next 7 slides talking about these different aspects. Next slide, please. So the first recommendation is to strengthen access to foundational data and promote data share. So foundational data could be data on productivity, on soil, on so many other aspects related to the production process or marketing, etc. So let's take, for example, the example of agricultural insurance. Traditionally, farmers, especially smallholder farmers, were excluded from insurance markets because of several reasons. First, they tend to be small, transaction costs associated with insuring them are high, they live in remote areas, so many different issues that make the cost of providing insurance to smallholder farmers very high. At the same time, we see that freely available satellite data has enabled the emergence of a completely new set of entrepreneurs who are designing innovative insurance products using the satellite information available for free. So this foundational data, the satellite data, is spurring innovation, creating products to serve a population that has not been served by index insurance, by agriculture insurance in the past. And several entrepreneurs exist. We see WorldCover, for example, is an insurance provider in Ghana that uses this freely available satellite data to monitor rainfall and trigger payout for farmers. Next slide, please. So The second important recommendation is to ensure data privacy, ownership, and security. This is still an ongoing issue in many countries, and there isn't a final solution yet. Even in the US and Europe, policymakers are still exploring how they can overcome these issues. Perhaps the Europeans have more expertise in this area, and they have an extensive experience in this area of data privacy, ownership, and security. And in the report, we present some examples. So why is this issue of data ownership and control important? It becomes important when we think about the value of data. So when we think about an individual piece of data, for example, the information about my production levels, it doesn't really have value. But when we aggregate information about how much a million farmers are producing in a given area, that starts to get some value in economic terms, and it becomes important who uses that information and how they protect it, what they do with it. So that's why we think that it's very important to safeguard data ownership, security, and privacy. Slide 10, please. Next slide. So the third recommendation is to review regulations that constrain the adoption of digital technologies that enable precision agriculture. A good example is the use of drones for precision agriculture. So in some countries, for military reasons, this technology is not allowed. And in cases where the drones are allowed or authorized, sometimes we need to go through 4 rounds of authorizations to use them. So this is a missed opportunity for farmers who could benefit from this technology to monitor and control pests and also improve their production, collect more data about their fields to tailor the inputs and seeds to the local soil conditions, for example. So reviewing the regulations, relaxing these regulations to allow farmers to have access to this technology may be helpful. Another example of how to review regulations is with satellite data. More than 10 years ago, satellite data became free and available to everybody. And that, as I said earlier, triggered a lot of innovation in designing insurance contracts or products to generate early warning, etc. So very important recommendation in our views. Next slide, please. So the fourth recommendation is to ensure competition in digital markets and avoid digital concentration. In this case, we think that the role of the public sector is to make sure that digital technologies and data are interoperable. So this interoperability would allow us to combine data generated on the farm by other entities with data from multiple sources. For example, government could encourage interoperability between mobile operators, for example, Orange or Telecom or something, and financial institutions to improve the financial inclusion of smallholder farmers. So in this context, interoperability means being able to send money across different money operators and for mobile money operators to be able to connect to different banks. So for a smallholder farmers or for farmers, this means they can send money across mobile networks and saving accounts and receive them in real time without paying fees. Also, antitrust regulation and taxation are key traditional instruments, and we go over them in the report. Next slide, please. So the fifth recommendation is to enable digital payment system. This is a crucial point. Without digital payment system, there are no digital technologies, no platforms. It's very difficult to do e-commerce, connect farmers to market and consumers to farmers, etc. So these digital payment systems, they dramatically reduce transaction costs associated with the food system and also create more trust in the system. But these digital systems, they are only successful if both parties, consumers, producers, they trust this transaction and they trust that it has enough interest for them and trust that they use this form of payment. Also, here we think that consumer protection frameworks, robust digital connection networks and banking and telecom system are important to support this type of digital payment system. Next slide, please. The sixth role of the public sector that we think is important is scaling up innovation ecosystem. Like in any innovation, the role of the public sector is crucial, but it should not be displacing private sector. Digital entrepreneurship is really the key driver of the innovation in the digital solutions for the agri-food system. But really, the quality of this entrepreneurship depends on the surrounding ecosystem, the quality of the enabling environment. And here, the government has a very important role in encouraging the startup phase of these technologies. So when these technologies are very small, it's an idea, it helps to get a seed grant or participate in innovation challenge to obtain startup funds and continue to develop this idea for the agri-food system. So in this regard, the government can use multiple tools to promote innovation, to encourage innovation, and create this thriving digital innovation ecosystem. But they should not be displacing private sector and providing funds for technologies that are already established. And in the World Bank, there are several examples where the private sector supported farmers' access to technology and entrepreneurs develop technologies that serve farmers' needs. Next slide, please. And so the last seventh, which is the classic one, which is really supporting foundational research and development. There's a lot of research that shows that investing in public research has very high return in agriculture. And also when we look at the digital solutions in agriculture, a lot of them are based on already existing large body of research in agriculture, which is often funded by the public sector. So redirecting some support to fund more research and development would improve the enabling environment for digital entrepreneurship and would help entrepreneurs develop even more solutions. Also, of course, it would be important for the private sector to collaborate with the public sector and work closely to develop research and innovative methods and support research and generation of ideas to help entrepreneurs. Next slide, please. And finally, a key role of the public sector is to ensure that digital technologies are equitable. We need to think about how to make these technologies equitable, protecting the marginalized populations from overexploitation, providing them access to digital technologies, also paying special attention to the opportunities that these technologies create for women and girls. Today, to be offline or not having access to digital technologies like smartphone means being excluded from valuable services, inputs, output markets, and this digital divide, whether it's between men and women or vulnerable populations, could really be deepening existing gender inequalities and pushing women and vulnerable populations further into poverty. So these are the main messages and recommendations of the report. We lived a pandemic, and this pandemic provided an opportunity to see what is the role of digital technologies in the food system. And we show in the report that there are huge opportunities with digital technologies. They could really accelerate the transformation of the food system. But of course, the role of the public sector is key in safeguarding consumers' rights, farmers and consumers' rights, and also promoting innovation and development of the entrepreneurship ecosystem. So that's it for the presentation. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present, and I really look forward to answering your question. I also want to add there's an agriculture community of practice focused on digital data-driven agriculture, led by my colleague Pamash. I'm not sure if he's here, but there's a thriving community at the World Bank that specifically focuses on these issues. Look forward to your questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Gala, for your presentation, sharing the main point of the report. We received some questions from our viewers in advance, and also some questions we received during your presentation Got that. So I'll read those questions and ask you to respond. Some of the questions you may already have sort of touched upon during your presentation, but I just wanted to read and ask you to respond to those questions. First one, a question from Tanaka-san. Thank you very much, by the way, for sending question as usual. In development cooperation, we tend to focus on food security to secure availability of food for people in difficult situations. But I think it should be equally important to future food safety in international development. Would you please share your views on this matter and how this issue has been discussed in the report? How should the World Bank and other aid agencies deal with food safety in developing countries? So that's the first question. Agata, please.
Thank you, Koshi, and thank you for the excellent question. Indeed, food security is a complicated concept. It has multiple facets, and food availability is one of the dimensions. Food safety is definitely very important, both for the demand side and also the supply side. So on the demand side, today, many consumers are becoming more and more demanding. They care about what they eat. They want to know what they are eating and make sure that it has a good quality. I think a few days ago in Europe, there was a recall of a large amount of products because of contamination of sesame with some type of fertilizer. So consumers are very aware, especially with the publicization of these types of food safety issues. So in the report, we show that yes, there are requirements, there are opportunities to tap into markets where consumers pay a premium for high quality, safe product. But the issue is that the transaction costs are important, and this is where digital technologies could help. They will not solve the whole issue at once, but they could contribute to the solution, and they do that by reducing transaction costs associated with complying with this food safety. So we can think, for example, about sensors, data management software, blockchain technologies that allow farmers to demonstrate the safety of the food that they produce. In terms of traceability, we can think of the example of Uruguay, where they put a small tag in beef ears, and that tag contains all the information about the beef, about the animal, birth, age, everything. And that information communicates with information in other data sets. And so all the history from birth to the slaughterhouse is recorded. And in case of a food safety concern, it's very possible to locate the first batch and eliminate the animal, identify the animal that has the issues and the farm and take the actions that are required. I hope this answered the question. But there are more information about this in the report.
Great. Thank you very much. Next question, from Yamada-san from Nagoya. Thank you very much for your question. Would you please introduce good examples or cases in developing countries in which an agri-food system has been digitally transformed or plans are being implemented in developing countries? If such cases are front runners, what are elements that allow and push them to carry out such transformation? So that's a question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This is a very, again, an excellent question and requires a whole page to answer it, but I'll try to answer the question. Yes, indeed, the World Bank, the Agriculture Global Practice with the other practices such as digital development, they are supporting countries to provide to develop digitally their agriculture sector. I worked in the Africa region in the past, and I know that there were many initiatives, for example, the Million Farmer Platform in Kenya, where multiple farmers are linked to different actors along the value chain and having access to input, pesticide, extension through digital platforms. The World Bank is also supporting several countries in Africa and elsewhere to improve the enabling environment for digital technologies and create the ecosystem that allows entrepreneurs to thrive and develop activities and develop solutions for smallholder farmers. So also the World Bank is supporting many countries in Africa to build capacity and skills and research, also support public sector institutions to access on data access, analytics, and how to use publicly available data to generate tools that are needed for innovation, for to provide solutions for farmers and etc. So there are many things happening. I can give an example of a country where this is happening now, but we are supporting many countries. And the element that allowed or pushed countries for this transformation, I think they are similar to what I mentioned earlier, which is really in this first, the willingness to transform the food system and recognize that business as usual is no longer an option, and that there is this digital revolution that we need to take advantage of. Also, creating a good enabling environment is really important to support entrepreneurs, and paying attention to the other issues of data right and privacy, etc. So yeah, this is a complex question. I hope I answered. But I invite you to also read the report.
All right, thank you very much. Next, several questions sent from anonymous participant. Thank you very much for sending your questions always. Let me read the first one. It is mentioned that we need to secure land rights to consider small farmers. However, it is often said that inheritance to female rights on land is behind to men in several regions. There are community land tenure systems used through customary law in some areas. Then how do you fairly secure the land rights where these social norms exist? That's the first question.
Thank you very much. Indeed, it's a very important and critical question. We don't really tackle it in the report a lot, this question, but it is important. We can think of it through the lens of access to credit. In several countries, developed countries, to get a loan, you need to have an asset. And for smallholder farmers, the land is their only asset, and that's the only thing they could collateralize to get access to loan. So if they don't have a title that proves that this is their land, then they cannot have access to credit. So if we think that the objective is to secure access to credit, which is a key development challenge in many of our client countries, and there are other ways offered by digital technologies to overcome this issue. And in the report, we discussed digital credit. And this is a method that allows banks and financial institutions to collect information to create something that looks like a credit score based on a lot of information that is used by and provided by farmers. And so this data could come from the platforms that farmers use to buy inputs to sell their products, how they interact with other farmers. So leveraging all this data that's already there could create a pseudo credit score that allows farmers to get access to data and kind of bypass the requirement of having land to be used as a collateral, because now they have access to digital scoring. But this is an important question, and that's why agricultural development is complicated, and we need to take into account all the social norms and find solutions around them. And thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question. Does the data for digital technology on agri-system include the social norms or pressures which would affect on selection of productions or crops in farmlands?
It is a very interesting question. Indeed, if we think about digital technologies, so they wouldn't necessarily include data on social norms or pressures from the group, but what they could include, what they could do is they could influence farmers' choices. There is a large literature that shows that social networks, peer pressure is very important for the adoption of technology. So if we have a digital technology like WhatsApp, or a producer group on WhatsApp, and they all exchange information on what methods they use to grow their crops or to market their products. So there we can see the emergence of a kind of a social norm in the group, and that would lead farmers to adopt the technologies that were adopted by their neighbors. So that information wouldn't be recorded by the data, but we can observe it from the data, I guess, and it would be an interesting thing to consider when policymakers and entrepreneurs design technological solutions.
Thank you very much. Another question. The nutrition had several aspects such as education, distribution within the household, consumption preferences, and so forth. The title refers cooking, and how do you mitigate the gap from those aspects through the agri-food system in order to meet each dish is high quality. I think a little bit rephrasing the question, and then how can we secure the quality of food served at household level in a digitalized food system, while people have different educational background, different consumption behaviors and different preferences of food at household individual level in different societies. So I'd like to ask you to respond to those points. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is indeed a very good question. If I try to think about it, so basically, this is linked to the first answer, actually, the first question. So the key with digital technologies is that they allow us to collect enormous amount of information about the value chain, including consumer preferences, what they want in terms of product quality, product characteristics, taste, etc. And also they allow technologies like blockchain, so they allow farmers to trace their products and for consumers to make sure that their products respond to certain criteria. So with the collection of data, the ability to process data, digital technologies could, in principle, create so many, a lot of information on labels, on quality characteristics, and signal the differences between the different products. Basically, digital technologies could create new markets of new products to tailor to the needs of each consumer. I don't know if that answered the question, but basically I see it this way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We received the question from Professor Nakano of the Tsukuba University during your presentation. So let me read her question. I think the key for digital transformation to contribute equity is whether it excludes or includes small-scale farmers in developing countries. What do you think about the possibility that small-scale farmers can be included? I would appreciate if you can provide some concrete examples where small-scale farmers were included or excluded, especially by private companies. Well, that's her question.
Thank you very much, Professor. This is indeed a very important question, and it's also at the core of our work at the World Bank, since we aim to reduce poverty and promote shared prosperity. So definitely including smallholder farmers is a key priority in our work. Regarding digital technologies, as you rightly pointed out, there are risks of digital divide, and this is where the public sector needs to intervene. We can see several solutions for that. Solutions are to invest in technologies that target smallholder farmers. For example, we see that livestock producers tend to benefit less from digital technologies because most of the solutions now are targeted to crop producers. So one way to solve this issue is to provide public funds to encourage entrepreneurs to invest in these technologies. Another risk comes because many smallholder farmers tend to not be able to read, and therefore they may not be able to use the digital technology or benefit from them properly. But at the same time, there are many innovations that are, for example, picture-based, that don't require any level of literacy. So there could be investment in that area as well. So there are several solutions that try to include smallholder farmers, but the key here is really for the public sector to keep an eye on this issue and always make sure that an assessment of who are the winners or losers are of any intervention, including digital technologies. In terms of examples of where farmers have been included, I can cite the Kenya Million Platform project that's supported also by the World Bank, and where thousands of millions of farmers are connected to value chain providers through digital platforms, and they can have access to inputs, seeds, information, extension, insurance, all sorts of services through digital technology. So this is truly transformational, and you can find more information about this project in the World Bank website. And I don't have an example of exclusion, but I'm sure it's not hard to find.
Okay, thank you very much. Being moderator, and if he wants to take advantage of that, I want to ask one question. In the seventh recommendation toward the end of your presentation were about the importance of the research. Now, considering agriculture research, I would naturally think of roles played by research institutes under the CGIAR consultative group for international agriculture research, and some other institutions like FAO and others might also be engaged in research aspect of agriculture. So I would like to know, how are you currently collaborating with the, for example, the research centers under the CGIAR system, and then specifically from the report's perspective, where will be the potential, entry point for the further collaboration with those institutions? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Koichi, and very good question. Indeed, so CGIAR institution, Global Research Institution, has always been our partners in any project, the report that we develop, including this one. So if we think about digital technologies and the digital transformation of the food system, it doesn't stop at this report, it goes beyond the report. But to produce the report, we collaborated with CGIAR institutions and other international research organizations. For example, we collaborated with the SIAT to produce digital agriculture profiles for 5 or 6 countries. And so these profiles are basically practical tools for policymakers to assess the status of the digital development of their country with the agricultural lens. And these were developed by CGIAR institutions. We've had a very close collaboration with research organizations throughout the process, made sure that we collaborated. Now, the implementation phase, the recommendation of the report, already in our projects, in the World Bank financed project, there are always partnerships with IFPRI, with the Tropical News Center Institute, ILRI, for example, for livestock insurance and digital data related to livestock insurance. So there are several entry points. What some entry points are for them to help national research institutions to also build their capacity. Also initiatives on open data, support countries to develop open data and open access to information. Yeah, there are several partnerships out there, and they're already pursued by our colleagues who work in these areas.
Thank you very much, Gada. You very efficiently presented the main point of the report, and then very efficiently responded to all the questions that we received from our viewers. So before wrapping up our seminar, I'd like to ask you to give us a very final remarks as a co-author of the report to the viewers in Japan, and then we wrap up our seminar. Final words from you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So this report was really the product of a cross-department collaboration within the World Bank. It's an interdisciplinary effort. Also, we collaborated a lot with people from outside the World Bank, with international organizations, academics. We also built the capacity of interns who worked with us on the report, and we benefited from the expertise of leading academics in this area. So we hope that this report would be the starting point or the continuation, because the revolution is already ongoing, to help policymakers determine what are the key things to focus on to develop digital technologies further in agriculture to reap its benefits and minimize the risks. As I said, we have a digital agriculture community of practice. Perhaps we could share the link at the bottom of the YouTube video. I will also send you the link of the global lead, and if you have questions on that, you can direct them to our team. So with that, I hope you found the presentation useful, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Great. With us this morning, connecting from Washington, was Gada Elabet, the senior economist in agriculture and food global practice of the World Bank. Thank you very much, Gada, for joining us this morning from Washington, D.C. Really appreciate it. Thank
you very much, Koichi, and thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you very much. Okay, next week in our morning seminar, we will feature a new report, Banking on Protected Areas, Promoting Sustainable Protected Area Tourism to benefit local communities. This report was just launched on Monday this week in Washington. Our future speakers are Arvesh Narayan, the lead economist, and Hashina Bamar, the environment specialist, both from environment, natural resources, and blue economy global practice of the World Bank. This is going to start at 8 a.m. On Friday, June 25th in Japan Standard Time. With that, I would like to once again thank you for tuning in. Stay safe, stay healthy, and see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.